Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week here on the Dynasty Factory Tour. As promised last week, I said we'd have a special guest today. I'm here with one of the brightest minds in the fantasy football industry, Jakob Sanderson. He's taking a short break from writing 10,000-word Substack articles about balloons to grace us with his presence. Jakob, how are you today?
I'm doing good. It's also funny. I need to find a way to write better for the specific audience. Like one of the oddest things is when I'll occasionally get an unsubscribe and then it'll say like low volume, and I'm like, it's kind of true. Like I don't actually publish other than around rookie time. Around rookie time I was publishing every day, but since then, like I don't necessarily publish every week. But if you just look at the raw word count, like if I could just if I had the patience to break up some of these articles into like 4-part articles, the same average length of a normal article, then we would have content every single week. But yes, excited to do the show today.
Yeah, you need to start splitting them up into like little Roto World style blurbs and just release them one paragraph at a time. You get half a metaphor on Thursday, you get the other half on Saturday. Exactly. I think that would be maybe a more effective business model, but it's not really how I'd like to consume the content personally. Well, before we get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your work and where it can be found, your Substack and other projects.
Yeah, you can find pretty much all of my written work now on Thinking About Thinking, and that's jakobsanderson.substack.com. You can find the link to that at the top of my Twitter. And we do kind of all sorts of stuff there. Predominantly, I do dynasty work and I do best ball tournament work. And so that's kind of always what I've generally done wherever I've been writing. Most of the spring content was all dynasty focused. I've released 2 best ball focused articles. I'll have more coming throughout the summer, but I've also just released some dynasty rankings on the site. That includes my dynasty running back tiers, where I sort of go through and I break down through different archetypes, how I get to those ranks on each running back, some notes on each guy. So we mix in some things. I'm going to do a piece in a week or two ranking the best backfields in the NFL from 32 to 1, just based on the value of the players versus the cost in both salary and draft picks. And that'll be kind of like a real life football article, but I think it'll definitely have some best ball and dynasty application as well. So we do all sorts of stuff on there.
Yeah, as somebody who personally subscribes to Thinking About Thinking, I can tell you it is definitely worth your money. I like to just steal all of Jakob's analysis and pass it off as my own whenever possible. So, you can do that as well. Yeah, that's great. I kind of doubt anybody listening to the show isn't already familiar with your work, but we got that out of the way just in case. Now, today's show is going to have kind of a unique format because we're really just going to talk about one central question. We're going to explore the concept of rebuilding. And the question is really just, should you be rebuilding? And we're going to go into all of the ins and outs of that, how you should be approaching your dynasty rosters and making those types of decisions. Real quick before that, we'll just jump into one little recent piece of news, which is Dalvin Cook being released by the Minnesota Vikings. I know you have some thoughts on this. You posted some tweets about it. So I wanted to just read one of those tweets and then have you kind of expand on your thinking and how you came to this conclusion. Specifically regarding Dalvin Cook first, you said, we'll see where Dalvin winds up, but I doubt I'll be into him. Efficiency has declined over the last 2 years and is no longer entrenched into a certain role. He's mostly a replacement level starter at this point, would expect a fast start and a cold finish in his new home. So there are definitely people on Twitter that believe Dalvin Cook to be washed. I am one of those people. You are as well. So maybe first, how do we come to that conclusion? What metrics are you looking at there? And then just go into your thoughts on his now new free agency.
Yeah, so I won't read out all of these numbers because there's like a million of them on this page that I'm looking at here. But this was in the Bulletproof Discord. I posted a summary of his performance from 2020 to 2021 to 2022 in a number of key metrics that I look at for running back play. That's rush yards over expectation per attempt, rushes over expectation percentage, so how often you are rushing for over expectation, your PFF rushing grade, your PFF overall grade, your juke rate, which is a tackle evasion metric from Player Profiler, breakaway run percentage, and yards after contact per attempt. If you look from 2020 to 2021 and then to 2022, you see a clear decline from 2020 when he was one of the best running backs in the NFL still and had been for a couple of years in a row, especially to how we end up here. There's some metrics in which he was slightly better from 2022 versus 2021. There's some metrics where he was worse, but what you'll see overall is a running back who's clearly declined. He still had some breakaway runs last year, which I think give him credit. Some very, very long breakaway runs, which juice sort of his yards after contact per attempt a little bit because he's picking up so many on some specific runs. But you look at his overall success rate of his rushes, overall rushes, yards over expectation, it's not good. We know the deal with running backs, like similar to wide receivers in a lot of ways. It's not an age cliff per se in that once you hit 27, you die. But it's, once you start hitting 26 plus, you're probably going to die at some point, and we're just not really sure when. But Eric Eager was talking about this on Twitter, and I replied to him. I've called it the canary theory of running backs, which is usually with elite running backs, we tend to get 1, maybe 2 seasons of this running back isn't actually that good anymore, but the team didn't proactively plan for them to not be good anymore. And they might not even be realizing the way in which their play is declining week to week. So their fantasy production stays largely the same. And you kind of get this inefficient, still really useful season. And then after that, teams start making arrangements and that player no longer provides the same fantasy value, right? If you think of like Zeke, I was writing about how he had really declined as a player to a large extent in 2020. We didn't start to see that decline come until 2021, really, as a fantasy asset. Kind of similar with Alvin Kamara. Looked like he started really declining as a player in 2021. All of a sudden, it's last year when he starts to take a bigger hit as a fantasy asset. And the Vikings, of course, signaled, what they think of Dalvin Cook by releasing him from their team. So I hesitate to write a player off from a fantasy perspective because we've seen several longtime workhorse backs be not very good at football and still provide a lot of fantasy value. You think of Leonard Fournette in 2021 with the Bucks. You think of James Conner for at least stretches each of the last 2 years with the Arizona Cardinals. I don't think either of them were special talents. I'm not sure either of them ever were a special talent, certainly not in the way Dalvin Cook was. But you get in certain favorable situations where a team doesn't necessarily have a great running back depth chart. They want to focus their rushing game through one guy, and a guy who has that workhorse ability all of a sudden gets all the touches, and that's really all you need. So I don't know. I think it depends, like I said, where he ends up. If he gets to Miami, it wouldn't stun me if they decide, okay, we don't have a very good running back depth chart, and we're just going to give it all to Dalvin, and he gets 280 touches, and he's a back-end RB1 like he was last year. But it also wouldn't stun me if he starts the year off as a team's lead back, and they go, man, this guy isn't very good, and they don't have any investment towards him anymore, right? He's no longer a franchise player, a team captain, the locker room leader, none of that stuff. The team is going to probably pay him $3 to $5 million, maybe some incentives. They'll be bringing him in on a flyer. And if he's not providing value, it wouldn't surprise me if they look elsewhere. We saw that happen with Todd Gurley, probably most dramatically with the Falcons, where he gets that small contract. He's getting all the touches early in the season. He's scoring a good amount of fantasy points, not producing good real life results. They come back after their bye and they're like, anywhere else. We're going to Ito Smith, right? Like, we're looking anywhere else. This guy can't do it anymore. We've seen that kind of with Le'Veon Bell too, right? Like, he opened that 1 year with the Jets, getting a lot of touches. They were like, man, this guy stinks. They cut him. Chiefs bring him in. They start giving him a bunch of touches. They're like, yeah, this guy stinks. All of a sudden he's like a healthy and active in the playoff run. So that's kind of where I see it going, is he starts off with more value than he finishes the year with.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. He had a fine season last year from a box score standpoint, 1,100 scrimmage yards or whatever it was. But the key is those other metrics. You can see where that decline is coming. And like you said, there's usually a little bit of signal of that before it actually manifests on the field for all these different reasons that you listed. So I think the actionable advice here is, you can sell Dalvin Cook. If you have Dalvin Cook and he signs somewhere, you want to try and sell him. I don't think he's a player you want to go and buy unless he signs and you see his value just absolutely drop off a cliff. Like James Conner was totally washed, but he was also very, very cheap for a long time. So you could buy in to that if he was projected to get volume. But I think that the actionable thing is, like, look at running backs that are coming up on that 25, 26, 27 years old and pay attention to those underlying metrics, because it can come fast. And when you start to see that little bit of decline, it's probably better to just get out a year early.
And one last thing with Dalvin Cook, he has not averaged over 3 receptions per game since 2020 either. And last year, he had a career low where he was at just 2.3 receptions per game. So I think there's an idea of Dalvin Cook as like a full 3-down back. That's not really the case. He's never actually cracked over 60 receptions in a season. He's always been more of a suitable receiver than a dynamic value-adding receiver. So I don't think he has like the Leonard Fournette out, for instance, where it's like, okay, like Leonard Fournette's going to suck and he's going to lose some of his rushing work, but he's going to catch 80 balls like we saw last year. I think Dalvin needs to be that full-on bell cow to even be a low-end RB1, because he's just not getting it done in the receiving game.
Yeah, that's definitely true as well. All right, we'll briefly touch on Alexander Mattison and then we'll move on. Are you trading away all of your 2025 first-round picks for Alexander Mattison, the new workhorse running back?
No. I mean, I was actually surprised. Like we were in an auction draft just this weekend, and I got Alexander Mattison in that auction draft. I think it was 12% of my budget, which I was fine with. I mean, I think there's like a whole crowd of running backs right now that are like the archetypal dead zone running back. Like, it's kind of weird. It feels like I don't think we actually had that many last year. When I say dead zone running back, what I really mean is like a back that is of either unknown or unspectacular talent, is kind of projected a lot of volume because other backs around them aren't particularly inspiring, and probably not a running back where you're projecting a really high level of pass catching skill set to them. So it's sort of that traditional running back workload without the traditional running back background, or, you know, a really high level of efficiency that we want to project for them. It seems like as these 2017 running backs have been aging out, that a lot of teams are just kind of taking a flyer year on a lot of these running backs, and we're going to see what happens. Like, you think of Madison, you think of an Isaiah Pacheco, you think of a Cam Akers, you think of a Rashad White, you think of a Damian Pierce, you think of even a Miles Sanders. Like, these are all kind of really dead zoney running backs. They're all going a lot later than this archetype of running back used to go, especially in redraft and best ball, that I think makes their prices a little bit more palatable. I think Madison is more or less the same as these guys. I think his upside is a bit overstated in that whenever Madison has had these fill-in games for Cook that people remember, you have to remember that was a team that it was like they had Cook, they had Madison. There was nobody else that they were ever planning to play or working into the game plan on a week-to-week basis. Cook goes out, and it was never a prolonged stretch without Cook, right? It was always 1 to 2 weeks at a time. And the easiest thing to do when you're adjusting on the fly 1 to 2 weeks at a time is, okay, well, we'll just give this guy all the work, right? And he winds up with really even a higher backfield share in those weeks than Cook would have when Madison was active. That's not usually then how it works. Like, I don't think that they're going to just give Madison a 90% opportunity share when they weren't even doing that with Dalvin Cook. So I think Madison at his best probably plays a role much more similar to what Dalvin Cook played last year, which was really back-end RB1 usage. And I think he's facing a threat from all sides in that Madison was never really much of a pass catcher in college. He's never played a pass catching role in the NFL except on a fill-in basis week to week. He's clearly like good enough at it that they let him do it on occasion when Cook misses games. But I think Ty Chandler has more of that in his college profile. I don't know if they view Madison as a guy who needs to be an every down guy. So I think Chandler potentially is the threat on long down and distance. And then McBride, is a really limited player, but had really impressive rushing numbers and efficiency at college or in college. I could see him being like a Gus Edwards-y, Damian Harris, Khalil Herbert type of player where he's that rush only complement, but they want to work him in and get him some carries and he'll be effective on those. So I think the more likely scenario is that Madison starts the year in that Dalvin Cook-esque role from last year, and then starts to see some carries and some receptions from both sides over the course of the year, because there's no real evidence that he's a particularly special player.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely see him as more of a low-end RB2 type than this, all systems go, full bell cow. And I don't think we have enough of a sample size to suggest that he's going to be that. We don't really have the pedigree. He hasn't even really been efficient with his touches over the past couple of years. So yeah, I agree. I don't think people should be getting out over their skis. I haven't necessarily seen any over the top trades involving him in my leagues, but I have seen some crazy trades on Twitter. And trading Tony Pollard or trading Alexander Madison for Tony Pollard or vice versa, and all kinds of weird stuff. So
yeah, I've been offering him up. I'm slightly over market on Madison. He was never a guy that I particularly loved, but I always like targeting backup running backs, just as generally. So I kind of lock into it sometimes. I've put him on the block everywhere. People have been like, "Oh, would you take a 24-second?" And I would not take a 24-second. Like, I think that's like, to me, a 24-second is like sort of to me, that's the offer you take for your 1-year rental running back when it's week 8 and you either aren't going to need that running back in your playoff lineup or you're not going to make the playoffs. But going into the season, like, what are you going to be drafting as a 2024 second? You're probably going to be taking like a mediocre running back you hope gets a starting job one day, right? Like, you're not taking
the
like
next Alexander Madison. Yeah.
You're taking out, who are you taking? You're taking Tank Bigsby, right?
Exactly.
Like, so it's like, you're not. So I don't see that as a payoff. That to me is like a liquidation when that Madison doesn't have any use to you this year and you want to bet against him having value in 2024 plus.
You're always going to be able to get that return. You don't need to rush to trade him for a 2024 second. Like, you could have gotten that from some people before Cook got traded. So that's not the ultimate end game. You want to try and use him to get into a higher end asset, maybe put him together with something else for a 2024 first. But otherwise, you don't need to just sell him off to sell him off. It's always about the cost and the return. So I think we covered that.
A lot of times people it's just a general take, but I think a lot of times with these types of guys, like, people will be like, people will feel like if they hold this guy and then he expires on their team, that's a lost value, right? It's actually kind of the same idea that I saw somebody post a tweet of like all of Dalvin Cook's stats. And they were like, I can't believe they got 0 value out of this guy. And I was like, that is the value they got out of this guy. Like, they got like 6,000 rushing yards and like over 40 rushing touchdowns and all that stuff, right? It's like, it's kind of this weird fallacy. Like, in hockey, this happens all the time at the trade deadline, where you'll see a team like will trade a first-round pick for a rental player, and everybody's like, oh yeah, that's like what you do. You trade a first-round pick at the deadline, you get a rental player, and they leave at the end of the year. Then a team will have a player on an expiring contract, and they won't trade that player away. And people will be like, how can you not trade that player away? He's going to walk away for nothing. You're going to lose him for nothing. It's like, yeah, that's like an own rental, right? Like, you're just deciding that you're going to keep that guy. I'm not saying you should always do that, but I think it's totally fine, depending on your roster build, to be like, yeah, I have Alexander Madison, who's probably going to expire on my roster. And if I can trade him for something that I think has that core asset value, if I can get a first-round pick for him, or if I can get a wide receiver that I believe in as a longer-term option, sure. If not, I'm just going to ride the points, and maybe he doesn't produce those. But between the net of all your portfolios, of all of the Madisons and Pierces and Pachecos and hidden things that you find out, I don't mind just riding that out, taking some points. I don't think you have to liquidate every single one of them like they're a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, I think that's a trap that I've fallen into in the past when I've kind of had some found money on my teams. I've maybe been a little bit too desperate to unload it, but trying to take a more patient approach. And I think that ties in really well with what we're going to talk about here today, which is whether or not teams should be rebuilding in Dynasty. So first and foremost, there are a lot of kind of definitions, I guess, of what is considered a rebuild. There's kind of your longer term view, which is like, I'm going to blow up my team and take 2-3 years to build it back up. There's these like 1-year turnarounds where you can unload some value, pick up some young players, and then hit the ground running the next year. So there's different sort of time windows involved. There's different ways of going about it. But in general, when you're rebuilding, you're trying to unload some players that are older, pick up some draft picks, younger players, and then eventually try to win in the future. I think the biggest issue about this, especially in the Twitter sort of echo chamber, is that managers decide to rebuild at the drop of a hat. Like, if June 1st comes around and they don't think they have the best roster in the league, it's like Black Friday, every player over 25 years old is half off. And it's like, whatever, I'll win someday. And I think that's the first and maybe biggest problem that dynasty managers are facing, because I think they maybe don't fully grasp the cost of losing a season in dynasty.
Yeah.
So let's start right there and just say, like, do you think people should be a little bit more hesitant about tanking or rebuilding?
Yes. And they should especially be way more choosy about the returns that they get. One of the weirdest things that I have experienced this year, even more than any year, is like we're starting to see more orphans in a lot of leagues, frankly, that I joined during COVID, right? Just naturally. And you're seeing some of these teams that were in like a 2-year win now cycle, and then all of a sudden they orphan the team. Somebody else comes in, and it clearly is a roster that probably needs to be rebuilt at some point. And it's like a 24-hour stores closing sale in like May. Like, it's one of the weirdest things. Like, a guy will come in and be like, everything must go. And then it's like you check back to the chat an hour later, and like half the good players on his team have been sold for 80 cents on the dollar. It's like it's a run on the bank. And I don't understand that at all. Like, what's the rush, right? We have literally the entire offseason at the very least, and potentially even into the season. And then you should be quite choosy on the returns you're getting. It's strange sometimes. I'll be a contending team in some of these leagues. I'm seeing people sold for things that I would have paid more. It's like, how have you not talked to every single manager about the players that you're trying to sell and really canvas the situation? But beyond that, if we just look at whether or not you should rebuild, I think that in general, less teams should be rebuilding now, right? I think ideally the goal is to try to have the highest expected value that you can for your team over a given period of time, right? And it's probably, I usually kind of max out at like 5 years when I'm thinking about this, because you really can't depend on a league being around for all that more than that. And all things considered, you'd rather have your higher expected value years now than later, just because you can be a lot more confident your league's going to exist this year than in 2027. Frankly, if you win the money now this year, with the way inflation and investment goes, I would rather win the money now than in 5 years as well, unless league fees change. But anyway, so I wrote this big piece that I think you're kind of hinting at, called "Don't Let Perfect Be the Enemy of the Good." And one of the cases that I made for that is to be willing to embrace the middle more at this time of year. I have these categorizations for teams on my spreadsheet that I keep track of my teams on during the year. And I have it sorted through a number of different words: dynasties, favorites, contenders, reboots, tanks, teardowns, and TBD. I won't get into all of those here because I'm already long-winded enough. But what I'll have a lot more of this time of the year is the TBDs. And then I don't want to have those in November. But for now, I think it's fine to look at your team and be like, okay, this team could maybe contend. Maybe, I don't know, if things break right, it could. And if things break wrong, then I can liquidate out. What I'd want to avoid at this time of the year is being overly tied to anything, right? I don't want to have a kind of low value, lot of veteran contender without my first, because then I'm really stuck on one path, right? That's not where I want to be. I don't necessarily want to be, I have nothing on my roster and I'm absolutely rebuilding, because I've had this scenario happen before where I get way out in front rebuilding, and then all of a sudden I have a couple players that were expected to be total nothings and they become really valuable. And it's like, shoot, like I wish that I had not sold the rest of my guys, because I might have been able to move up the timeline, right? All of a sudden I got, oh wait, I drafted Isaiah Pacheco in the 4th round, but now he's an every week starter. Like I could have gotten something out of that. So it's a balancing act. I think you want to give yourself flexibility. Best way to keep your flexibility is keep your draft pick. And the best way of your flexibility, I think, just in general, is to have more of your assets invested in highly liquid pieces, right? So I want to be, as much as I can be, overweight on draft picks across the board this time of year, and then kind of just shoestring together some of my rosters with a few old veterans, and then, you know, whatever other core pieces that I have. And ideally, I want to be taking care of quarterback and tight end, where you have those positions of scarcity locked up with strong assets going forward. I don't know, maybe if you have more specific questions. But.
Yeah. So I like what you said about, you know, staying liquid, giving yourself options, being flexible. Cause it's like, you have these two paths of rebuilding and contending. And the thing is, like, right now, they're mostly parallel paths. Like, you can stay, you know, you can walk between the two paths. You don't have to turn right or left right now. Like, teams are rushing out to jump on, you know, the right path or the left path. Like, I'm a rebuilder, I'm a contender. And honestly, like, the moves that you're making don't really need to be that different, you know, right now, based on what you're going to be doing.
Right.
Because, you know, like you said, you want to invest in draft picks. You're not allergic to draft picks if your team is contending. Like, you can still take in draft
No.
picks. I think the problem is that managers pay too much attention to the players that are on their roster and not the overall value of their roster. Like, I think that's really the core problem, is that you look at a team and it's like, well, I've got all these young guys. I've got 2024 picks. Like, clearly I'm not a contender. I you know, this is like a next year team. But if you have one of the more valuable rosters in your league, like, that can become a contender, right? Like, if I was going to come visit you in Canada and I had $1,000 in my pocket, I wouldn't throw my hands up and say, I guess I can't, you know, buy us dinner because I don't have any Canadian dollars. Like, I would go to the airport or wherever and they would give me Canadian Monopoly money, and then we would buy dinner and it would be fine. You don't have to have you're contending. You don't have to have Devontae Adams on your team right now. If you have a 2024 first round pick in August, you can buy Devontae Adams and you can use him in your lineup.
Right.
So
yeah, I wrote in this piece. I was just pulling it up. I basically talked about that there's two types of team constructions, which is largely is renewable constructions versus credit constructions. And the idea of a credit-based construction is that at some point over this next window of time, you're going to have years where you're not competing, and in others, you're going to have windows where you are competing. So we often have a saying we talk about in the Bulletproof Discord of buying receivers on credit. I think that the idea of a credit-based construction works both ways. First off, you're going all in now. You're trading your draft picks. You're fielding a roster on credit, right? You're essentially saying, I'm going to pay later for this roster because I'm going to dump future draft picks that I can put more points in my lineup. By the same token, productive struggles are a credit-based construction because you're effectively paying now where you're literally paying. You're paying entry fees. You have no intention of being able to recover this year, potentially next year, until the future, right? These are both forms where some of the years you have 0% win equity and you're hoping to make that up later, right? You're either going to try and make hay while the sun shines now so that you're up ahead when you later don't have any draft picks, or you're going to concede expected value right now because you're going to build such a super team later. Here's sort of where that comes in, right? Renewable constructions, I would say, is ones where you're looking to sustain a reasonable chance to beat every year. So I put in this graph in this article, if people want to pull it up later, where I put in your win expectancy each year, right? If you just have a random 1 in 12 shot winning your league every single year, you have an 8.3% win equity each year. And so I drew this one line sort of, okay, here's your cumulative win expectancy over a number of years, right? And effectively over a 6-year period, you wind up having a 50% cumulative win equity. And then what I wrote was these other graphs. Okay, if you are doing a 1-year productive struggle, how much higher over 8.3% does your win equity need to be to get back to equilibrium after 2 years, after 3 years, after 4 years, after 5 years? And you can see it slightly start to decline the longer after you've gotten rid of that 1 year, right? Did the same thing for a 2-year productive struggle, or by the same token, a all-in window that would then require 1 to 2 years of tanking, right? And what you see is that it's quite a bit higher win expectancy, especially if you reduce it to just a 3, 4, 5-year window, so that you need to have a way better chance of winning your league in the years that you're competing than everybody else does who isn't throwing away those years. And that becomes really difficult for another reason, okay? And that is that the best teams do not win as much as people think they do. People have this weird idea of the unstoppable fantasy team. There really is not an unstoppable fantasy team. The higher seeded team wins just 56% of playoff matchups generally, which that tells you that either really dominant teams are losing quite frequently to not that dominant teams, or that it's not always the most dominant teams that are actually getting the bye weeks, right? And that are getting the higher seeds. I think it's a mix of both. We play a game that's very random week to week. We also play a game that's fairly random season to season. And so you're often going to see teams that got a bye that are not better than the 4 seed they play in round 2. And you're also going to see elite teams with byes that lose to worse 4 seeds in round 2. And so because it's almost a coin flip, really the only thing that you can do to materially improve your odds is to put yourself in reasonable contention for a bye, right? It's just to say, I think I have a chance at a bye, and then hope that the cards fall in your favor, that you either get the bye or that you don't, and then you win a series of coin flips to the end. And it really does put a lot of pressure on you if you're throwing away years, to the point where I don't want to concede rebuild years unless they are absolutely necessary. So I think I've gotten in this fight a couple times in like the nuances of this fight with Coop about, full on liquidation or less liquidation. My take on it is for as long as you can reasonably be competitive, you should try to be. Especially for as long as you can be reasonably competitive with a reasonable value roster, you should try to be competitive. The moment that that's no longer the case, I will liquidate a lot, but it doesn't mean that then I liquidate for eternity. Right. So I'll use an example of a team that I had where I came into last year with kind of like a very mid-value team. And it was pretty top heavy. Like I had some guys, I had like Cooper Kupp and Darren Waller and Christian McCaffrey all on this team. And I was pretty dependent on them for production, and Jonathan Taylor. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just ride this and see where it goes. Within a couple of weeks, Kupp gets injured kind of mid-season. Waller also gets injured. I still had a pretty good chance to make the playoffs, but my roster was entirely non-competitive. So I was like, at this point, I'm just going to liquidate. And I did liquidate fully, but my goal was I don't have a chance to compete this year. So if I have any chance to not tank next year, I need to completely liquidate and then rebuy and try to basically buy a roster next year for cheaper than what I just got for all my pieces last year. And I've kind of done that where I went out, like I got a bunch of picks for all these other guys, like a Sutton and a Jacoby Myers and whomever have you. And then I sort of repurchased on the fly, like a Keenan Allen, a Devontae Adams, a couple other guys. And then now we'll see where I kind of have this roster full of these old dudes, but I also have all these excess picks. And hopefully I can push in this year. And if not, I have an easy pivot again. So there are ways, I think, to do it where you kind of keep stringing along competitive rosters without ever that tank year. And it can go both ways. You can stay over on picks and add some veterans.
Yeah, that renewable construction definitely gives you those better odds year over year. And then the hope is that cumulatively all those better odds over years will outweigh, not doing a full all in or a full tank for a full year. And I want to repeat what you said, like right at the beginning, because I think it's really, really important. You said the higher seeded playoff team only wins about 56% of the time. So I think that's really important for rebuilders and for contenders, right? Where you have these rebuilders who are like, there's no way that I can win. My team's okay, but it's not good enough. I can make the playoffs, but I can't win the championship. Or the other way where it's like, well, I need to go all in. I need to go spend every last bit of roster value that I have on, some 28-year-old running back because that's the guy that I need. I think in both cases, just step back and like look at those percentages, right? You're probably not as out of it as you think. And on the other side, you're not as likely to win as you think. And realizing that, I think, can help you maybe adopt this renewable approach a little bit more easily and not think it has to be all or nothing. Like the idea of being first or last in your league is not totally off base, but I think we're a little bit too maybe confident in that decision, right? Like you said, once you knew you weren't going to be able to compete, like you had no doubt that your team wasn't going to win because of injuries, then it's like, okay, well, it's a race to the 101, but you don't have to make that decision immediately. And you shouldn't be making it lightly.
Yeah, I think honestly, the easiest way to sum this all up is if you just think about diminishing returns. And I wrote about that a lot in this piece too. You can have diminishing returns in both ways, right? If you already have the really good roster, you already are the 1 seed. There's really only so much better your odds can get. And it's not that much, right? Like you already have the 1 seed clinched. 2 coin flips would be 25%. So you probably have something like a 30% chance to win your league. You probably can't physically get that much higher than a 35 to 40% chance, right? Even if you're a 2/3 favorite in both of those weeks, you're still under a 50% chance to win. So at that point in time, like your best move at a trade deadline, if you're that dominant team, is actually, okay, who are some like players that would be more valuable to other teams than they are to me? Or who are some of my top players, and then I can internally promote. But it's probably selling some points off and being able to add more in picks or youth, because you could probably do more to extend your window than you can to improve your odds in that year. And vice versa, if you're one of those teams that's productive struggled out of the gates first year, you have all these picks, you have all these rookies, you have a ton of value, and you're like, yeah, but I don't want to lose a deal. I don't want to push in. Well, I'd probably rather lose a deal and push in a little bit than just sacrifice a whole nother year until you have this unstoppable juggernaut. Because if you're the top team or the second best team in value, you can probably already compete for the next few years, kind of regardless. You're have more diminishing returns carrying like 8 first-round picks on your roster than you would in spending one of those and maybe getting 90 cents back on the dollar, but getting some players who can improve your odds in this year, probably the hardest year for you to compete in, versus future years you're already going to be really competitive in.
Yeah, that's a super counterintuitive point, but it's like completely true. You know, I don't think anybody would think, oh, you have a good team, trade away some of those points to extend your window. Because I've fallen into the trap of like, I'm buying everybody. Like I need all the depth and I need all the guys that I can put in my flex, you know, just in case somebody gets hurt. And it's like, it's not necessary, because number one, like if your good players get hurt, you're probably not going to win anyway. And number two, you can go out and buy those points like when you need them. But the move isn't sacrificing that roster value now to go out and buy a depreciating asset that you probably aren't going to play or that you don't intend to put into your lineup. Like I think people overpay for like either QB3. They feel like they need to go out and get a really good backup quarterback in Superflex, or they go out and buy these like depth players like a Zay Jones or a Tyler Boyd. I think those are real like value traps where people end up moving these late picks, or you know, younger players that aren't producing right now, or injured players that are going to rise in value. And it's these there's wearing away at your roster value just a little bit at a time. And over time, eventually all of those decisions that aren't really improving your odds of winning are undercutting your ability to stay competitive long-term. So I think that's a really great point. I think more people should be considering that and kind of consolidating their rosters around these, you know, studs that are actually in the starting lineup and trying to kind of kick the can down the road a little bit. So that's a strong point. And I wanted to give an extreme example of this idea of like the perpetual rebuild. So I had an interaction on Twitter with the Dynasty Onion. We interact a lot. Like he's a cool guy. I asked him if I could bring this up because I'm not trying to roast him or anything. He has a really, really good Dynasty team. Where he listed kind of his core assets. He has Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Bijan Robinson, Tony Pollard, Dalton Kincaid. He has some other rookies. He has 8 2024 first-round picks. And I was in a conversation with him on Twitter begging him not to tank this year, because his intention is to tank this year and then compete next year, because he will then have his super team. He can bank all these 2024 first round picks. And now his window is, you know, extended out into eternity. And my argument is like, you have like multiple first round redraft picks here. You have the 2 best quarterbacks in fantasy. Like you need to move some of those first round picks to fill out the rest of your lineup. And you need to go win this thing this year. Like don't waste a year of those players' primes. And I think that really encapsulates the like perpetual rebuild mentality.
You know what's actually a good metaphor for this? I think I just came up with it. So, of course, in Canada and in America, but I think to a slightly lesser extent, we have graduated tax brackets, right? So it's not like no matter what, the government takes 20% of your money, right? I'm just going to use numbers that aren't actually reflective of the real policy because they're going to be round numbers, so it's easier. So let's just say, you know, your minimum tax threshold is $20,000. So then you pay 10%. And then if you make 50,000, you pay 20%. And if you make 100,000, you pay 30%. You pay 500,000, you pay 50%, right? And so you're paying more in taxes the more that you make. That's kind of how I view these dynasty things, where it's like, okay, would you rather be making $800,000 a year than $600,000 a year? Of course you would, right? Of course you would. And you're never going to have the tax brackets get up so high that you're actually making less money if you're making more money. But the extent by which you're making more money, the further you get, continues to decrease because you're paying a higher percentage of it away in tax. And that's kind of where we're at with Dynasty, is that, yes, you can make your 1 seed better, but the extent that you can make your 1 seed a better 1 seed is way less important. You're getting way less juice. It's worth the squeeze than making your 6 seed a 2 seed or your 10 seed a 6 seed. And so I think teams should be less focused on making the best parts of their window even better than they should be focused on making the worst parts of their window a little bit better, right? So if you're in that spot of Dynasty Onion, it's like, yeah, your 2024 is going to be really friendly to you no matter what. Like, you're already going to have a great 2024 to 2027 run. Could you have an even more unstoppable team if you continue to tank for a year? Probably. But what are you getting out of that, right? You're just moving up a tax bracket. So sure, you're getting more money, but you're paying more of it away in taxes. Whereas you add a year here, you're going to potentially stay a little bit lower in that tax bracket. So you'll have a little bit less money in future years, but you're also saving more money in taxes now. You're getting more money up front now. You're going to have more over the long run.
There you go. Metaphors on the fly. You can find more metaphors like this on Thinking About Thinking. But yeah, that's a good one. I totally agree. It's like we said, your odds of winning the championship in a given season are already low. Like, you can't, at the beginning of the year, you really shouldn't have more than like 25% certainty at best that you're going to win, because you have these injuries, you have unexpected players that bust, you have so much random variance in a single week playoff matchup where even if you're the favorite, you're probably, you still have a great chance to lose. So you can't just keep adding win probability in perpetuity. So when you have the chance to compete, give it a shot. Go ahead and try to compete. The other side of the coin, which we've kind of been circling around, we've maybe hinted at a little bit, we haven't outright said it, which is, when do you actually call it and decide to rebuild, and how are you making that decision? And it's obviously going to be different depending on the roster and, the time of the year or whatever. But generally, what are the signals that it's like time to rebuild and, accept that this isn't your year?
Yeah, so it kind of does depend on the time of the year. But I have 3 rules of thumb that if you hit any of the following 3 categories, I would at least think really hard about rebuilding. So one of those is you're in the bottom 25% in team value, right? So if you have one of the least valuable teams in your league, the rebuild's probably coming at some point regardless, right? Like, you're probably not going to be able to continually sustain a competitive team in perpetuity from a really low value position. So I would probably rather do it sooner than later in that case. The other option is you're one of the worst 3 teams in this year projection, and you're not above average in value, right? So you're not projected to score a lot this year, and it's not because you've been productive struggling and you do have 10 first-round picks to go and spend if you want to. You're just kind of an average value team, but it's all young. That's where you probably wanted to spend one more year to get up into value. And then the other aspect of that would be, you are either mathematically or almost certainly eliminated from playoff contention in season. So either injuries have happened to you, or you've just gotten really bad luck in the points. But at this point in time, even if you like your team, even if you like your value, it's just mathematically going to be very, very difficult for you to contend. You probably want to pull the plug. And then the overarching addition to this is that the modifier is really what picks you have, right? Like, if you don't have your own first round pick this year, the benefit to you of rebuilding is very low unless you can make a proactive deal to get your first round pick back as that first domino to fall. If you can't do that, you're probably just going to keep trying basically until you're mathematically eliminated, because you kind of lose half the benefit of a rebuilding year there. If you do have your own first round pick, especially if you have like a lot of first round picks, or you're carrying like an injured player, it might be you might be willing to rebuild a little bit easier if you think that would make your roster would really fit with your roster construction.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Again, bringing back the idea of roster value, right? It's not just about the players you have on your team. It's about the value of those players. What can they net you in a trade? And I've taken over orphan teams that are like, they're an absolute shambles where literally, like, no matter what I did, there was no way that I was going to be contending within 2 years. And that's just the nature of the game sometimes. Now, if you do that to yourself, that sucks a little bit, feels bad, but it happens.
Yeah.
But, you take over a team that's really, really low value, you might have to spend 2 years bringing it back to life. And probably the most plus EV move would have been to not take over that orphan in the first place and just do a new startup. But, orphans that's all about caring and a little bit of charity. And usually the first year's paid, so it's okay. But you're trying to bring that team back to life. You're trying to make moves that are beneficial in the long term. So how are you doing that? If you have either your own kind of a reboot, or maybe you're taking over a low value team, or maybe you're coming out of a productive struggle, what kind of assets are you targeting? We know we're targeting draft picks. We want future draft picks because they always accrue in value, but maybe some players, since we haven't really talked about players in like 35 minutes now. Who are some players that we could maybe go out and try to obtain to hit the ground running in our next legitimately viable, window of contention?
Yeah, first thing's always just injured players, right? I mean, the one like mandatory players, like if you haven't either already acquired or tried to acquire Kyler Murray on any team you're not contending this year, I think you're just making a massive mistake, right? Like that's probably, there's no player. I mean, the best way to even articulate his value is if you look at how much his value has dropped since the very start of the offseason, which is usually when we'll start seeing more people make more roster decisions that are this year focused. You see how he keeps dropping. That post ACL, post start of offseason to now drop to me is entirely based on worries about him not playing this year, right? Like there's always going to be anti-Kyler FUD regardless, but that FUD does not get you into round 3 of startups. That might get you into round 2 of startups. Right. That rest of that is just, I don't want to spend my early startup pick or trade 2+ firsts worth of value for a player who doesn't play this year, right? That's a pretty hard sell to a team. It's hard to construct a roster that can reasonably contend while holding that much dead weight. So got to go get Kyler Murray and take advantage of your ability. I wrote a 12-step guide for rebuilders at my first ever website. And I entitled the section "Leverage Your Suctitude," which is all about finding ways to leverage being bad, basically. Other guys that I think you should target would be like really look at running back contract situations. Like this Madison situation was really easy to see coming, where you get a guy where it's like, okay, they're probably not bringing back Cook and Madison next year, right? Madison's going to be at the end of his contract. Cook has a reasonable out in his contract. That's a guy who's probably going to rise in value at the end of the year because he's probably either going to get paid by some other team or the Vikings are going to retain him and let Cook walk. There's always going to be running backs like that. I think that you can even get really proactive. Like a guy like an Elijah Mitchell for me is an example of like a player who has proven that he can play in the NFL. He's totally blocked this year. He has only contingent value, but like that's not going to be forever. Either CMC is going to get hurt. He's a little bit old, or eventually Mitchell's contract will toll. He might get a chance somewhere else. I want to target him on every roster right now, but I certainly want to do it on rebuilding rosters where his lack of projectable volume is really the only thing holding him back. Make a similar case for a guy like an Antonio Gibson, or really any running back who's in a spot where their current spot isn't great, but you might have that window on a future contract. And then in general, I mean, of course, you want to be targeting rookies, right? Rookies are the safest bet to gain in value. And the biggest thing that I would always say, actually, this is another big issue I think rebuilders make. So I always say target 2025 firsts over anything else, right? Target year +2 firsts. People say, well, I want to be competing by then. Like, well, you can be, right? Like if you buy a 2025 first now, that doesn't mean you have to make a draft select for that pick in 2025. Like you can buy a 2025 first now, you let it toll the year, right? I talk about all the time. I say picks have a hold tax. The hold tax is effectively what reduces its value from the time that it conveys to the time that you trade for it, right? You're paying a tax because you have to hold the pick, right? So it's not going to have the same value. You pay for the 2025 first, you pay off a year of the whole tax. It's effectively tax-free for you. You're sucking this year anyway. You have a tax exemption. So you just get to sit on that 2025 first, let it collect value. And then if you want to next season, you can trade it next season and you're going to secure a profit. That 2025 first will almost certainly have better buying power in the year of our Lord 2024 than in 2023, right? If you bought a 2024 first this time last year, you can now trade it for more than you could have if you trade it away today, right? So you want to buy those picks. The people are easiest to give out. And I on late picks, like I would even do it with 2026 picks. I call it the base value or base value theory, which is I talk a lot about base picks in my stuff with value. I say this guy's worth one base first, right? So for people not familiar with my writing, a base pick is a pick in a future year that has an equal opportunity to be any of the 12 slots. So it's not a mid first, not a late first, it's not an early first, it's a base first. And I always say in a vacuum, a base first is more valuable than a mid first because the difference between a mid first and a late first is lower in terms of the value delta than the difference between a mid first and an early first, right? Early first is a lot more better than a mid first, than a mid first is better than a late first. So base first, equal opportunity across the board, is better than a mid first. But you can't really ever trade for base firsts the way that they're explicitly defined, because how often do you ever have a pick that's 1 year out from conveyance that is equally opportunity to be any of the 12 spots, basically in a startup before anyone's ever picked a player? That's the only time. Yep. So what you really want to do is you want to get as close as you can, which is if you trade for a 2026 first, that's basically the only time that you'll ever be able to buy what is potentially a very, very early pick that is not priced like a very, very early pick. Because typically you want to buy an early 2024 first right now. You're probably not getting one because the teams who suck and have their own 2024 first, they're not trying to give up their 2024 first. The teams who are trying to trade their 2024 are probably good. And then maybe you'll have a team that is good, is competing, holds somebody else's 2024 first, which projects to be early. You can get that pick, but you're probably going to have to pay for it because that person can say, have you seen this guy's roster? His quarterbacks are Baker or Jameis. Give me an early first.
Yeah, as somebody who has several teams that suck, you're not getting my 2024 firsts. You're not getting my 2025 first either, but not every manager thinks that way.
But you can get it from teams who are good, right? There's teams who are good now but fragile, and they'll be like, I'll pay for the 2025. I'll give you the 2025 first. I'll give you the 2026 first. Nobody has a clue what their team is going to look like in 2026.
Yeah, it's actually backwards because I've seen teams where they're like, well, I don't want to trade by 2024 first, but I'll trade by 2025 first. It's like, no, if your team is good, it's actually you're better off for two reasons trading your 2024 first, because number one, you are more confident it's going to be late. And number two, even knowing that, you're still likely to get a bigger return in the trade because it's a year sooner. Like, you should keep that 2025 first in your pocket as your backup plan if you need to pull the parachute next year. But what is the value of that 2024 first to you, really? If you already have one of the, the better rosters in the league, you should be more willing to trade that. But I think people get in this mindset of well, I want to keep my window extended, so I need to add another promising rookie next year to keep that going. It's it's all just a big mess. And I think it's all kind of backwards, but like you said,
I try to do explicitly the opposite. Like, I have some teams where those teams that are in that contender favorite category, the ones that aren't especially high value, probably average value, but they are quite good this year. If I'm looking at a roster that has a Devontae Adams, a DeAndre Hopkins, an Austin Eckler, all these kind of expiring pieces, what I'm trying to do is I will sell my 2024 first if I need to patch a hole in the lineup, but I want to acquire an additional 2025 first, because the way that I'm looking at it is my team's gonna be good this year. Also, the 2024 first, I'm already committed to going all in. I'll give up the 111, the 112. That's fine, whatever. I want that 2025 first, because then I have the scenario of I have my own 2025 first. I have someone else's 2025 first. Maybe we are able to do either a really quick pivot where I bottom out and we're able to get two top 4, top 5 picks in a draft class and just immediately get back into it after one tank year, or we can just let our assets die. And then by the time, right. But then by the time that our assets die, we can backfill them. Right. So we kind of just play it off a 2-year window and we just kind of backfill it on the fly.
Right. That's the renewable, hope, right? That's that renewable structure as opposed to the buying on credit. Yeah. You can have Travis Kelce on your team and just have the tight end one and win a bunch of games, as long as you're managing everything else well, you're picking up those future picks and just letting them kind of accrue value over time. speaking from experience, like I only became a high volume dynasty player, and I'm even using high volume kind of loosely. I'm in like 15 leagues, but that was, within the last year or two. And so it's taken me time to get into that mindset of
Mhm.
not going all one way or the other. Like it definitely takes time to get used to, especially because there's so much discourse surrounding that all in or tank, one or the other.
Right.
But it can be so beneficial. You can really improve your odds of winning consistently, netting a profit over time, especially if you're in a lot of leagues and you can kind of have a portfolio of teams that where some of them are, better than others in a given year, but over time, more and more of them are in that winning window that just sort of stretches out. So it's
I'll also
really so beneficial to try to get into that mindset.
for sure. And I'll also say quick too that your league settings, specifically your league settings for how draft picks are awarded, should really play into a lot of the specifics of how you make these choices of when to rebuild, right? So, for instance, and also just the tendencies of your league mates, right? Because a lot of tankers are pretty lazy ass tankers, right? So, like you can get in situations where, especially if it's based on max points for, you can make up ground on the field really, really fast. Where if there's a team that's just kind of like lazily tanking, so they did like the obvious, they like sold off their Devontae Adams, they sold off their Aaron Rodgers, but they're not like really going out of their way to sell off their third year, fourth year players. They just kind of have like a generically bad team. Like you can try, and then it's like week 6 and you're like, oh, I'm in 9th place and my team isn't that high value, I'm going to tank. Like you can just literally cut like you can just trade all of your quarterbacks away.
Yep.
Right. And then it's like you don't have a quarterback anymore on your roster. So you're going to gain a lot of points on this guy, right? Like you can really, really like pick up ground and max points for in a massive way. If it's by record, potentially a little tougher, you might have to make a decision sooner, right? If a team's 1-6, you're 3-4, well, how many more games that 1-16 going to win? I don't know. And then it also depends on if it's a lottery, right? If it's a lottery system, I'm riding out a little bit longer because you don't get quite as much of a benefit of being actual last team. So it's all these different decisions where you kind of have to go in through layers of it, where like lottery system, I'm pressing my 2% win equity the longest, then max points for. If it's based on record, I'm probably selling off a lot earlier because it's just a lot harder to make up ground on the number 1 pick.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll say just like get creative, right? Find a way to get these points off your team, especially if it's max points for. Like if you know going into the season that this isn't your year, like stash your players on the taxi squad if you have that, right? Or trade players that are healthy for players that are injured. Like you said, players that are injured that are going to have comparable value to those players a year from now when they come back. Trading away your quarterbacks, that's a great one. Just work at it. Drop all the roster clogging wide receivers on your team that might have a spike week, but have no actual path to accruing value, right? Like you don't need to roster Marquez Valdez-Scantling on your rebuilding team. Like just have an empty roster spot or pick up a player that's not going to play. Like pick up a flyer at tight end or some third string running back. And you want to get those points off your team. So that's a great point. Let's circle around one more time to the other side here, and let's close this out talking a little bit about teams that do want to contend, teams that want to go quote unquote all in for a championship. We know going all in is kind of a fallacy. Like we said, you can't, there's a limit to how much you can boost your odds, but what are some ways that players that want to contend can maximize those odds in a given season without giving up too much down the line?
Yeah. So another thing that I've written a lot about, and I think this was more the article that I've mostly been quoting from was in a series. I think it was the last one in the series called Market Principles of Dynasty. This will be mostly from the 2nd edition in that series. And I talked about sort of the way we think about risk with veterans and why I think it's a little bit off, right? Normally we think of veterans as very, very risky. And that makes sense to some extent, right? They are constantly a risk of declining very rapidly. And you always get people that say, if Jamar Chase tears his ACL, how much value does he lose? If Cooper Kupp tears his ACL, how much value does he lose? And there's validity to that for sure. But what you do gain with the veterans is that you don't have that compounding effect on their value when something bad happens, right? You're usually only paying for a fairly short window of points. That's the amount that you're usually paying to get it. And I would say it's best to make purchases of elite veterans with the mindset that if they give you one elite year of their projectable production and then not much else, and you can't resell them, that you're willing to pay what you're giving up for that, right? You should have that mindset when you go about purchasing these types of assets. So what I would say to do is if you're trying to go all in terms of have that elite veteran roster, but you're trying to do it in a sustainable way, I wouldn't overextend myself out to all of the sexy players. Like I wouldn't go out and spend all of my draft picks and build this roster full of all of the AJ Browns and the Jalen Waddles and the Jahmyr Gibbses and all that stuff, because you're going to have to pay so much to collect all of these high-end young players that you're going to be completely washed out of draft picks. Now, it's different. If you are in that dynasty tier of teams that I mentioned, where you have so much more value than everybody else, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to just pile your stacks on the safest possible bets because you're just trying to protect your spot. But if you're looking at, okay, how do I try to keep this team where I maximize my chances this year and I try to have it somewhat sustainable, I would target some of those older elite producers so that you're getting those points more efficiently and you're able to still retain a pool of draft picks so that if things go wrong, you still have optionality versus if you're packing some of these elite young players, things go really wrong for them, all of a sudden you're now really stuck because you don't really have any chance to backfill that production because you don't have enough flexibility because you stored a lot of value in a very small number of assets.
So let me throw out a scenario. Let's say you have kind of a slightly above average team in terms of roster value. It's a pretty, decent contender, not necessarily a dynasty like you mentioned. And you have AJ Brown on your team.
Right.
And there's maybe another team in your league that wants to rebuild. And instead of targeting draft picks, they want to go out and buy these young players because that's a lot of people do that. They go out and buy players that are good and young, and that's how they want to rebuild. So let's say you have an offer on the table. You get Cooper Kupp and a 2024 first, but you have to give up AJ Brown. To me, that seems like kind of the type of deal you'd want to be making because you're locking in that same kind of AJ Brown production, maybe even better. And you're also banking that value down the road that can't get injured, that's going to rise over the course of the season. Is that kind of the gist of what you're getting at there?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's something you can look to do. It's very hard to get a team in position where you have like that team I mentioned earlier has Mahomes, Allen, Chase, Jefferson, Bijan. I'd love to know how he put that together, but in the average league, it's not realistic to make that your goal. Like your goal should not be that super team. It's great if you fall into it. Maybe you just happen to make the right pick every single year and that player just goes to the moon. But ultimately your goal should just be being a reasonable contender year in and year out and never having to hit the reset button. And those are the kinds of trades where maybe it hurts to part with a player like AJ Brown because they are really exciting and they're really good and they can produce for a long time. But if you split him up into two parts of like, here's the store of value, as a younger asset, and here's the points. If you think about it, like Cooper Kupp and a 2024 first is just like a way more efficient way to store that.
Right. Like I mean, I talked again, another one of these pieces where I talk about the three forms of currency that you have, right? Mm-hmm. Basically you have three forms of currency on your dynasty roster. You have current year production. You have what I call EYR production, which is borrowing from Harstat, expected years remaining. So projected production for not this current year, for future years. And then you have your draft picks, right? So you have picks, production now, production later. And, the most fragile of those is production later because things that impact your production now can also have a really compounded effect on your production later. So one of the riskiest things that you can do is storing a really, really outsized portion of your team value on production later at the expense of those other aspects. I think that like I have one team that is like that monstrous team. And it was a combination of just like good luck plus some good moves over a period of time where I got to the point where I was like, now I have so much team value that I'm not looking at trying to gain value, right? I'm not looking at even trying to like backfill my expiring assets. To me, the safest thing to do is, to store my value in the most secure spots that I can. So I want to overpay for the Jamar Chases and the Josh Allens and the Patrick Mahomeses, whatever, because I don't want to be messing around in like the second tier waters of, okay, I'm going to take a flyer on Christian Watson. We're going to see what happens with T. Higgins. Is Ramondre Stevenson for a big year. And I also don't want to just take on expiring assets like a Devontae or a Tyreek Hill or whatever if I don't need to at that point. I don't need to get cheap production. I can get expensive production. But that's so rare. I think I maybe have only a handful of rosters where I was taking that approach, where I was like, I want to overpay for the most secure long-term production. For the most part, I'm taking a slightly more measured stance where I'm trying to get the most efficient production that I can while being able to maintain that backfill of draft picks, right? You kind of have to be at a really high level of value where either you can buy, tons and tons of elite players and still keep a backload of draft picks, or have so much value that you're really not that worried about selling your 2025 first, right? That's very rare. And that it's not usually happening year one. Like that's probably like you've played for 3 or 4 years, you've played really well, you've gotten some good luck, and now you're at the point where you can do that.
Yeah, exactly. You need to live within your means a little bit as a dynasty manager. Like it can be fun every once in a while, go out and have a, $300 dinner. But if you're doing that every week, eventually, the check's going to come and you're not going to be able to pay it. So definitely don't want to try to turn every team into, stud after stud after stud. Focus on, getting that productive value at an efficient price, stockpiling value later. Last question I'll ask you, which pertains to one more fallacy of the all-in teams, the contending teams, which is caring too much about team needs, especially early in the offseason. So you see tweets all the time that are like, in June, your team doesn't have any needs. And I agree with that sentiment, but I think some people don't necessarily know what it means, because they look at their teams and like, well, I do have a need. Like my starting running back too isn't very good. So what does that expression actually mean? And like, what is the actionable side of that?
Yeah, I think the better, I've talked about this before where it's like, I'll say landing spots don't matter. And what landing spots don't matter really means is that we aren't good enough at pricing in the uncertainty of landing spots. Right. It's like your landing spot doesn't matter, but the landing spot only matters to the extent that it's both not priced into the market and that we can actually predict whether it's a good landing spot or not. Kind of the same with needs, right? Like your team does have needs, but you should only work to address those needs such that you're doing so at a reasonable cost and to the extent that you actually know what those needs are, right? You will have players on your roster that you think are locked in starters for you all year that in fact won't be. They'll either get injured or they're going to suck. And you probably have players that you think are just bench flyers who in turn will actually be, viable starters for you at some point in the year. So you don't want to go out of your way expending value on needs that may not exist. But I believe that Maslow was probably a great fantasy football player when he came up with the hierarchy of needs, because there is a hierarchy of needs to fantasy football, right? There's certain ones that are just more debilitating than others. I don't think anyone really has a need at this time of the year at running back or a wide receiver. There are just enough of them. Like there are enough of them. There's so many running backs and wide receivers just generally that there's going to be so many wide receivers and running backs that we're wrong about in both directions that you probably just don't even really know what your needs are, right? Like if you walk into the season with one good running back and just like a bunch of dudes on the bench, probably one of those dudes on the bench is going to work out for you. And then you don't have a need at running back anymore. Wide receiver, maybe to somewhat the same extent. And there's also just going to be so many players that you shouldn't go out of your way forcing need trades, because all you really need is like one of every 11 managers, all of whom have wide receivers and running backs that you would take on your team, who eventually just give you a good deal on one at one point in time. So you don't need to force it.
Yep.
Quarterback tends a little bit different, especially quarterback. I mean, quarterback, we do have more information, right? We mostly know who is going to start games in the NFL and who isn't. Like outside of maybe, we don't really know who the Cardinals quarterback's going to be this year. We don't really know who the Titans quarterback's going to be this year. We don't really know who the 49ers quarterback's going to be this year. Outside of that, and maybe Washington, Atlanta slightly, but they seem at least 80% plus. Other 27 teams, we can be like 99% sure who their week 1 starting quarterback is, barring a different injury. So you probably do know if you have a need there. I think at this time of year, like this is especially now with rookie drafts over, right? I never try to address needs prior to the rookie draft, just because it's such a good opportunity to make trades. Sometimes people fall to you that you don't expect. That changes your needs. At this point in time, yeah, like if you're expecting to compete this year and you don't have a plausible path to having 2 starting quarterbacks, like you probably need to trade for a quarterback. It doesn't have to be find the first guy you do, but I would certainly start making offers and engaging in conversation, because you want to have as many chances as possible, right? The last thing you want to do is walk into your league one day, see that quarterback that you might have been able to trade for, go for something totally reasonable to somebody else, because that's one less person who might have that spare quarterback to trade for. So I would be pretty proactive about addressing that. And a tight end, I certainly would be, looking to do the same, right? It's a little bit more random, and it's a little bit lower in opportunity cost if you just have a bad tight end. But I would be trying to address those scarce positions a little bit more aggressively for sure at this time of the year. But one big issue is if you solve the need, you want to really solve the need. Like, I don't think that trading for, like, the worst thing you can do is like, I need a starting quarterback. I'm trading for Sam Howell. And then it's like, in week 6, you might need a starting quarterback, right?
Gosh.
So if you're going to address the need,
but he was the cheapest one.
Right. So just if you're like, I can get Sam Howell for the 202, but I can get Aaron Rodgers for the 112, like just get Aaron Rodgers for the 112. Like just get a quarterback who's actually going to play the whole year. Mm-hmm. Right. I wouldn't, if you're taking, I'm totally fine, by the way, with taking flyers on Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder and Brock Purdy. But none of those 3 would be players that I would be comfortable trading for if this player doesn't start the whole year, I don't have 2 starters. That's no
right. Yeah, I have a pretty strong roster, looking to contend this year, where I have Lamar and Kyler as my 2 quarterbacks. So like, I just made a trade to get Jared Goff. I thought the value was fine, and I think he's like a totally serviceable quarterback who's certainly not going to break fantasy, but I know he's a starter. I think he's got, at least like low end QB1 upside, and he can absolutely hold down the fort until Kyler gets back. That's the kind of deal. That's the kind of asset you want to look at. If you can't get into an elite quarterback, or maybe you are in that kind of a unique situation where you have 2 of them, but one of them is not usable, that's the range you want to look at. You want to actually address it with like a legitimate player that you can rely on. And like you said, there's a hierarchy. So maybe we can adjust the situation, or the phrase. And it's not, you don't have team needs in June. It's, you might have a need at quarterback or tight end, and you probably don't have a need at running back and wide receiver. It's not as catchy, but it might be more actionable. And I think running back, especially like your running back 2 slot, is the place where you really, really don't want to worry about what your roster looks like at this point. Like, I think this is where I see the most egregious trades, where somebody goes out and overpays for like a Cam Akers, Isaiah Pacheco, all these dead zone backs that you mentioned earlier, really the same guys,
right?
Where they're trying to make their lineup look pretty in June when they don't actually need those points. And there's just so many ways that can go wrong. Like, first of all, you go trade for Isaiah Pacheco. Okay, he could get hurt, right? Like, Cam Akers tore his Achilles, J.K. Dobbins tore his ACL in the same offseason. So he could get hurt, first of all. Second of all, Kansas City could sign Dalvin Cook, right? Or they could trade for Derrick Henry. So there goes his value. Or he plays the whole season and he just doesn't actually impact your odds of winning, which is incredibly likely. And then finally, maybe you have a running back on your bench already who becomes a starter in like week 1 or week 2, maybe Samaje Perine, maybe Tank Bigsby, somebody like some running back's going to get hurt. Maybe you have the handcuff. Okay, well, now you don't even need Isaiah Pacheco because this running back's scoring just as many points, if not more. And you have this redundant asset that you overpaid for, it's declining in value, and you've given up something that, could have helped you down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, really all you need, I mean, don't go out and overpay for a placeholder running back. You can get a placeholder running back if you need them. Like, if you think about how, even in seasonal drafts, right? A lot of the times when I'm drafting like FFPC stuff and I'll do hero RB or zero RB builds, a lot of times like my RB2 in week 1 is just like some satellite back that I hope to get 4 catches for 30 yards and a couple carries out of. And we're just kind of biding time until we're able to either get somebody off the bench, promoted that we took a flyer on, or pick up somebody, off the street or off the waiver wire, right? And your dynasty team can be similar to that, just in that, you don't necessarily need to have your solution or RB2. That realistically, the difference between like a 12 to 13 points per game dead zone back and like your 8 to 9 point satellite back is just so minimal. It's very rare that delta is going to actually present itself within a given week, right? Like these guys are really sporadic. It's not like every week they score 12, every week they score 8, but it's that's actually going to present itself in the given week. And then that delta is going to be the reason why you lose a game it is a long shot. And it's not usually the case that actually does it. So it's fine to just give yourself a couple of weeks, get a feel for it, and then things change, right? If you still have a massive need at running back, come week 4 and you're 1-3 and none of your running backs really hit the spot. Okay, maybe. But at this point in time, like you don't know if you have a need at running back. Like you don't know if the need's already solved off your bench. You don't know if the player you trade for is going to fix the need. And then you don't know if you're a team that will be grateful that you went out and traded for a running back by week 4 anyway. Your team might suck. You might want to rebuild. So what I would say is if you do have a need, again, like don't do the patchwork thing. Just go trade for running backs that you actually want to trade for in a vacuum for prices that you want to trade for them. And if you can get it done, great. If you can't get it done, whatever.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with addressing needs or perceived needs if it's like at a palatable cost and it's for, like you said, a player you would want regardless. And if you think about it, there's nothing wrong with having a strong running back room, but if running back 2 is your least strong position, you're actually positioned to benefit the most from like general variance, because running backs are the position that we see come out of nowhere and produce the most often. Like it's not like you're going to see a lot of like wide receiver 60 plus type guys come out and break out this season, but there's going to be a lot of running backs that become relevant. So in seasonal leagues and in dynasty, if you have a hole at running back 2, at least you're positioned to benefit from like all the random stuff that happens during the season. Either a running back on your bench becomes relevant, or a guy like Deontay Foreman becomes available for trade very cheap because he's scoring points and, maybe he's on a rebuilding team and you can buy him on the cheap. So you should be comfortable with that uncertainty at running back, I think, and just lead into the variance.
I had a team last year that started off the season really thin at running back. I think my week 1 starting running backs were Leonard Fournette and Chase Edmonds or something like that. I didn't have anybody else obvious. And then it was like at one point in the season, I had, Chase Edmonds was dust. And I realized within the first couple of weeks, and I was like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? And I didn't really do anything. And then later, like I remember there was 1 week where I was like, Darrell Henderson was starting at that point. Eno Benjamin was starting at that point. Donta Foreman was starting at that point. I had a Tony Pollard on my bench the whole time and then became an every week starter. I still had Leonard Fournette on my team. I had Samaje Perine on that team. And I was like, 1 week, I was like, I have 6 players. Like I started running backs. Like I'm all of a sudden footing running backs to the flex. Like it became completely different.
You just had the island of misfit toys.
Yeah. Like I remember I was like, I have so many running backs. I need to trade away some of my handcuff running backs before they resort to being nothings. Cause like all of a sudden I'm just have like a cornucopia of running backs. You'll experience that for sure. Like where there's going to be some period in the season where all of a sudden a few of the running backs you've had stashed on your bench become useful at the same time. And you're going to go through your lineups and you're going to be like, I have the same Deontay Foreman or Samaje Perine start-sit decision in 8 leagues.
Yeah. And you want to be rostering all those running backs on your bench for that reason. Like, even if you're rebuilding, hold on to them because they're the most likely assets to immediately become worth a 2nd round pick and you can go ahead and flip them. Whereas if you're holding a bunch of wide receivers that are way down the list, Terrace Marshall or whoever, like the odds that something happens where they immediately become a viable starter that people want to trade for, or you want to put in your lineup is so much lower. So for so many reasons, get the Perines, the Mitchells, all those guys on your rosters, even the deeper plays. Malik Davis, I'm all for it. Like put him on your bench. You don't know what's going to happen. So love that. I think that covers all my bullet points. And that was a nice winding conversation. We kind of went back and forth from different builds, but I think overall it's like a really comprehensive look at, should you be rebuilding? How should you do that? And then the flip side, how should you contend? So I think we really nailed it there. Jacob, do you have any final thoughts before I kind of close this out?
No, I'm all good. This was awesome. Thanks for having me on, Paul. Always a pleasure. I mean, we've talked a lot on my show before, but this was super fun to do this on yours, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate making the time. It was a lot of fun. You know, I love chatting with you on the Discord and seeing your tweets and stuff. So I thought it would be great to have a nice conversation about this. And it's right up your alley. You know, not too many player takes. We could just talk theory, philosophy. It was great. Um, for those of you listening, once again, go check out Jacob's Substack, Thinking About Thinking. You know, follow him on Twitter at Jakob Sanderson. If you want, you could also follow me on Twitter at Paul_DFF. And if you're enjoying the show, you know, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It means a lot. Leave a comment. Like, did you enjoy this show? Is there something that you took away from it? Is there something you want me to bring up on another show with my next guest? I'm all for any of those comments. You know, follow the show on Spotify. There's been a lot of support early on already. And, you know, I see certain people reaching out to me about the show saying you enjoy it. And I really appreciate that. So just hoping to keep building it, keep making it better week after week. And, you know, this is just the beginning. So one more time, Jacob, big shout out to you. Thanks again for coming on. And those of you back home, I'll be back again next week with another guest. Take care.